Welcome everyone to today's webinar with our distinguished analyst from Forrester, Fatemeh Khatibloo, as we work to increase customer loyalty through privacy. Fatemeh Khatibloo, our speaker, is a principal analyst at Forrester and a thought leader in this space. I'm the CMO at WireWheel, and WireWheel is a company that makes it easy for you to manage your company's privacy needs. We help you automate your customers' privacy user experience and assure trust and compliance. Relevant to today's topic. So Fatemeh, if you're ready, we can click through. And after Fatemeh speaks, we will be taking your questions, which I encourage you to do through our Q&A feature in Zoom. Very much looking forward to your questions and to today's session. We'll be off video while Fatemeh gives the presentation, and then we'll be back. Thank you, and over to you, Fatemeh.
My apologies, I was on mute. So as always, I kind of want to start with a little bit of a personal experience that I had recently, and this may not be unusual for some of you. I had signed up, as Camille mentioned, and thanks for that intro, Camille. As Camille mentioned, I am a privacy analyst and cover privacy issues, which makes me a little bit of a privacy nerd, right? And so I don't tend to sign up for loyalty programs and things like that. However, during the early days of the pandemic, I did sign up for a Target account so that I could take advantage of their, shop online and pick up curbside, which has really been kind of a godsend throughout the whole pandemic. And so I had signed up for that and had taken advantage of it several times. Well, recently I found myself actually in a store to pick up a few things, and I had purchased these items and checked out using my regular credit card. I happened to be at a kiosk that didn't take sort of mobile payments. It needed the actual card. And interestingly, I was a few days later placing an order for some other things for curbside pickup, and I noticed in my recommendations and go-to items, the items that I had purchased in store just a few days prior. Now, this really shocked me, and of course I know that they matched the credit card to the credit card that I had used for my curbside pickup, but that's because it's my job. I didn't think that a whole lot of other people would necessarily have that experience, would know how Target had done this. And it occurred to me that showing me items that I'd already bought as my go-to or my recommended items was maybe a little bit of a waste of personalization experiences and opportunities. Now, important to note here is that I also went to my account and looked at my orders, and none of these items, indeed the entire transaction, did not appear in my account. So here they are ostensibly recommending these things to me, but I haven't gotten the benefit of any of my points for the trouble that they've taken. Like any good Twitterer, I decided to see what other folks on Twitter thought. And you can see here about half of the folks who responded said that it was creepy. And about another third said that it was annoying, but whatever, and only 15% said it was convenient. Now, here's the thing. That creepiness is not intentional. Target didn't set out to make me feel like, that's not so fun. But it was a misuse of their first-party data about me in a way that I didn't expect. And that that is ultimately what creepiness is. It is the experience that either falls outside of a social norm or an experience where a social norm doesn't exist yet. Now, we've all had creepy experiences, right? But it's kind of hard to define what it actually is or what actually causes it. And so we set out to kind of unpack that. And we solicited examples from hundreds of consumers about what was a creepy advertising or marketing experience. And by analyzing those experiences, we were able to identify 3 primary buckets of creepiness. The first is a perceived misuse of personal information. And this is where a company has connected or used personal information in a way that the customer doesn't really understand and can't really reconcile. It's that feeling of like, oh, why do you know that about me? And this is squarely where my target experience lies. Another example of perceived misuse can be information about me. So one individual in our study said, you know, I keep getting ads from this brand with people who are of the same ethnicity as me. Do they think that I can't empathize with people who don't look like me? These misuses of personal information are the most offensive to people, and they're the most likely to cause the individual to avoid doing business with that company in the future. The next example here is data hygiene. And this is often the result of poor data management practices. So it's things like incorrect probabilistic matches. We've all had that experience of an IP address being used to personalize and perhaps seeing, you know, Twitter or Facebook posts about, you know, an engagement being ruined because the bride-to-be was shown ads for engagement rings after her partner was looking at them. Likewise, things like sending marketing materials to somebody who's deceased can be another example of a data hygiene error, and these are the ones that cause the most emotional distress, and they really cause a deterioration of trust. The third and final bucket of creepiness is about invasive or aggressive marketing tactics. And here, we're really seeing the majority of experiences that people have online. It includes things like retargeting, where a pair of shoes follows you around the internet forever despite the fact that you've bought those shoes. Or location-based marketing and advertising, where you're walking somewhere and you see an ad for a competitor of the store you're right in front of. These are the things where there's no feedback cycle. There's no way for the customer to say, would you please stop marketing to me like this? And so they actually result in the worst word of mouth and social sharing, and these are the experiences that tend to cause people to do things like install ad blockers, which actually really damages the entire ecosystem. So really, these experiences that we're all having and that our brands are inadvertently creating have led to pretty major concerns on the consumer's part about data collection. So these numbers are really, really growing dramatically in the time that I've been studying them. So 71% of consumers are aware that the apps and the websites that they use collect their personal information and their activities. This number is up 10 points since we first started analyzing it about 5 or 6 years ago. And I will tell you that it sort of spiked right after the Cambridge Analytica news broke in 2018. Nearly 2/3 of consumers think that it's wrong for brands to track them across devices to send them more relevant ads. But this has become a standard operating practice for marketers. We link identities on our customers' work laptops to their personal phones and start to create a persona or a profile to serve them more ads. Consumers think this is wrong. And a quarter of consumers don't trust any companies to keep their personal information secure online. Now, this is a really dangerous trajectory for businesses because there are so many tools out there today for consumers to disintermediate data collection. And in fact, that is happening. So we used to see lots of concern, but the numbers here, the number of consumers who are using privacy-preserving tools were in the 40 and 50 percentiles. Now, 77% of U.S. adults use at least one security or privacy-preserving tool online. This includes the 43% who regularly clear their browsing history and clear their cookies, the 21% who block information sharing through their device settings by not letting apps have access to all of the permissions that they want, and then nearly 1 in 5 who use private browsing or incognito modes on their browsers when they don't want to be tracked. Again, this hurts everyone in the ecosystem, but we really shouldn't be surprised. Let me tell you what you're looking at here. A few days ago, I was on the privacy page of a very popular consumer website. I wasn't logged in, but I was on the privacy page. On that page alone, there were 40 ad server requests and 55 trackers. Aside from the obvious issue of data leakage and slowing down the ad load, the page load times, this is so tone deaf. It is a clear signal when I go to somebody's privacy page that I'm a privacy-conscious individual, that I'm a privacy-conscious user. So why are you firing all of these trackers? Now, I would argue and submit that it's unlikely that they even know that these trackers are all firing on their site because we don't take the time to do digital governance on every single part of our website. And we should, because consumers are sending us a very, very clear signal. One thing that I do want to really acknowledge is, though, that privacy is not a binary. It's not the case that people care or don't care. It's not the case that people trust or don't trust a given brand or a given kind of website. There's a lot of nuance to privacy. I personally got really tired of people telling me that millennials don't care about their privacy. And so we actually set out to understand privacy attitudes and behaviors at a much deeper level. And so we really started to look at the behaviors and attitudes that influence privacy. The first thing here is the willingness to share more personal information. Will people share their data for things like discounts or loyalty points, for better experiences? The next is privacy awareness. Do people actually look at privacy policies or look at the permissions that an app really wants to understand? Do they understand that there is a data economy out there? The third real variable is around comfort with that data economy. In other words, are they okay with companies sharing and selling their personal information, especially if there's some benefit to them? And finally, their protective behaviors. So are they actually using the tools that I mentioned earlier? Do they take measures to limit data collection when they're online? And so these four variables, attributes, really define and describe personas. We have identified 5 different segments that behave very, very differently depending on what their experiences are. The first segment we have are our conditional consumerists. And these are the folks who really love to shop. They love loyalty programs. They're excited about the data economy. And they are, broadly speaking, very willing to share their personal information as long as it comes with a benefit or a value to them. They are highly enrolled in loyalty programs, and when they do share their personal information, they're willing to do it for a lot of different stuff. So these consumers actually really love to be recognized as loyal. They like to have perks provided to them. They like getting advance notice of different kinds of events or offers or products, right? They're very tech savvy, but they are also privacy savvy. And what they tell us is that they will use ad blockers if it improves their experiences, and they will actually look at a privacy policy or look at an account page before they share lots of information to make sure that they can opt out later. Our second segment, which is also really willing to share personal information, are the reckless rebels. Now, it is true that this segment does contain the largest share of under 18s and students. However, they are also the most likely to migrate out of this reckless segment. Those who do tend to do it after a major life stage event, so when they've gone off to get their first big piece of credit, like a mortgage, or when they've had a child. The other half of this segment that tends to stay pretty stable, they actually really just think that the ship has sailed, and the data economy is here to stay. You know, the big platforms know everything about us anyway. What's the point of trying to put the genie back in the bottle? And so they do tend to be the least protective. They tend to be the least, willing to install tools or kind of ruin their experiences in exchange for protection, data protection. Our third segment are the data-savvy digitals, and these are really, really interesting folks because they're the ones who begrudgingly share their personal information in order to receive when it's required to receive the service or the product that they want, right? So these are the folks who would say, yeah, I'm going to sign up for the loyalty program of an airline because those miles or points are really, really valuable, but they're not likely to provide their personal information at the checkout of a shop in retail just to get 10% off their order. These folks are also extremely tech savvy. They represent those Gen Xers who are very tech savvy, very data savvy, sort of came up with the internet, if you will, became adults in the age of the internet. And they use a lot of privacy-preserving tools. They are the biggest users of incognito and protected browsing modes, and they really do tend to restrict and lock down their use of social networks and social media. Again, begrudging sharers of personal information. The nervous unawares are a very interesting segment because when we started to study this segment, the privacy personas, this represented the oldest of our segments. Now that honor goes to the data-savvy digitals. Today, the nervous unawares represent the biggest segment of folks who don't have tech savvy. They represent the most folks who have not finished college or high school. They don't really understand the data economy. They don't really understand the cost-benefit analysis of sharing personal information online. And they don't even know about the privacy tools that we surveyed them on. So of this segment, something like 30% actually say, I'm not familiar with any of the tools that you mentioned or any of the behaviors that you mentioned to protect myself. So they're just really undereducated about the risks of the data economy. Excuse me. And finally, we have the skeptical protectionists who are absolutely unwilling to share their personal information as best as possible. I sometimes fall into this category because the truth is, as a privacy nerd, I really, really don't like sharing my personal information. And if there is a privacy-preserving tool, I'm probably using it. This segment is also tech-savvy. They do tend to have some really interesting behaviors around the tools they use, around the industries that they're in. They are extremely tech-savvy, but unlike the data-savvy digitals and the conditional consumers, they're really untrusting. This segment is the only one where 0% of them trust anybody to keep personal information safe online. Now, how do these segments break out? Well, in 2018, before the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke, this is how our distribution played out. In 2020, we've had a shift, and we have moved more people out of nervous unawares and into data-savvy digitals. This surprised me. We've had a huge increase, 4 points, of the folks who are increasingly begrudging about their data collection and their data use. This tells me that the writing is on the wall, and increasingly people will take control and will worry about their personal information, that they do want more controls over how their data is shared. Now, here's the thing. Data is critical to marketing. Data is critical to how we run our businesses and how we personalize for consumers and how we reach the consumers that we have already built relationships with. And I want to tell you about a tool that nearly every one of these segments will willingly engage with brands. And that is this idea of zero-party data. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning my experience with Target. That was first-party data. It was the data that Target collected about me in the course of a transaction. But they could very easily have turned that data into zero-party data by popping up a little thing and saying, hey, Fatemeh, we noticed that you used your credit card in a store recently. Would you like us to add that to your transaction history? Suddenly, they're getting my intentional permission, my active permission to connect these two sets of data about me. Zero-party data is the data that consumers intentionally and willingly share outside of the course of a transaction. It includes my preferences, it includes my intentions, it includes my needs and my personal context. For example, that trip in the store might have been on behalf of somebody else. I might have gone shopping with somebody or for somebody as gifts, and maybe I don't want them connected to my transaction history. That's personal context. Zero-party data also lets the brand understand how to recognize an individual. For example, I might say any orders that I place or anything that I do and the searches that I do on my work computer shouldn't be connected to my personal devices. The other thing about zero-party data as an organization that you need to remember is it should never be shared or sold without consent. So let me give you an example of amazing zero-party data. Sephora is a master here. They know that skincare and makeup is a highly personal experience. So what they did was to create a really robust customer experience, user experience, to capture my skincare, hair care concerns. They allow me to indicate my skin tone and my skin type. They let me say whether I'm worried about fine lines or sun damage or acne. Again, really, really sensitive information for people. Now, once I've provided that information, they let me use it to filter products. What you're seeing here on the foundation shade is, Find Your Foundation Shade, is their ability to actually filter all of their products by only the foundations that meet my skin tone, that have a shade that would fit me. And they extend that experience into their emails in the recommended just for you. So for your green eyes, for your fair complexion, for your oily skin, they remind me that I've told them these things, and they're delivering real value for me taking the time to share this personal, sensitive information. And they've even found ways to use and collect zero-party data in chatbot experiences. So it's completely across all of their platforms. They are collecting information in this chat experience about what is most important for me in a lipstick. Now, this may seem really silly, but for Sephora, they are able to adapt to something like a pandemic on a dime because they have all of this data about their customers. And think about it as this tremendous barometer of trust that I'm willing to share all of this information in order to get benefits, in order for them to serve me better. They have a very trusted relationship with me. A zero-party data strategy does 5 really, really important things that are very privacy first, very human-centered, but also benefit the enterprise. So zero-party data tends to be captured through really rich experiences like the ones that I just showed you, and most consumers in our segments, with the exception of the skeptical protectionists, will willingly engage with these interactions. They enable a really consistent and relevant experience across channels. Why? Because when you've gotten permission to use this data, when a customer has willingly shared this information with a brand, you can actually connect it across all of your marketing platforms. You can actually use it in mobile and in email and in the store. It's a very different kind of data than observed data or behavioral data that's very, very hard to use across channels. It lets marketers validate their inferences in a privacy-friendly way. So Sephora might have been able to predict that I have sun damage concerns because I was clicking around on their sunscreen products and looking at sunscreen products. But here they can validate that inference in a very privacy-friendly way. Again, I might have been shopping sunscreens as a gift. They can confirm whether this is my real context or not. Here's a really big one. Third-party data is inaccurate and potentially risky, but marketers buy and acquire this data, reference it all the time. If we can move to a zero-party data strategy, we can reduce our dependence on third-party data. Look, go take a look at what Facebook or Google or Twitter thinks you're interested in your profile, and you'll see how wrong that often is. Moving away from those kinds of data for your organization is a tremendous benefit. And finally, this zero-party data is the foundation for an experiential consent program that meets regulation and customer needs. So what do I mean here? Think about those experiences that I showed you in Sephora. Those are longer. But imagine being able to get permission, being able to get consent in a really rich and contextual way, as opposed to with a banner that takes up 2/3 of your homepage. We can start to build consent into these zero-party data models in a way that really does prove to regulators not only that we're meeting the letter of our regulatory requirements and obligations, but the spirit of them. Ultimately, though, regardless of the type of data that you are collecting and using, you have to ask 3 questions if you really want to be able to continue to earn trust and meet privacy expectations of your customers. Before you collect a piece of data, you need to know whether it's relevant to your business. Are you actually able to draw a line between that data point and what you really need to know about your customers or need to know about your business? Is it actually actionable in your business strategy or your marketing strategy? If you're collecting a piece of data that you can't use, don't collect it until you need it. If you're sitting on a pile of data about your consumers that your marketers say, yeah, no, we're not really doing anything, we're holding on to that because it might be useful in the future, consider purging that data. Maybe it should be part of your data retention program to question whether the data is actually actionable. And then finally, can I use this data ethically? And what I mean here is, did I obtain the data in a way that my customer would actually expect? And can I make sure that it's being used in a way that's not discriminatory or not unethical? Can I use this information in a way that would not cause harm? So with that, I want to turn my camera back on and turn, and I think Camille is also going to join.
That's right.
And we are going to have a little chat.
Fatemeh, I'm so excited. I wrote down so many questions as we went through. And one of the questions from our audience, and I encourage other people to continue adding them, really goes under a subset of a large question I have, which is inspired by your talk. It's, zero-party data, for reasons we can talk about further, seems to really be the direction. I want to go into some use cases as to how to be able to gather more. One of our listeners asked, how does one do this where the customer interaction is short and transactional, such as when someone's buying food through a drive-through at a QSR?
Yes, my goodness, that is a great question. So loyalty programs are intrinsically zero-party data, right? And so we see a lot of success in QSRs for loyalty programs. Mm-hmm. Also see a lot of success when you start to think about the mobile experience and connecting into whether it is a loyalty program or whether it is a, hey, here's a fun thing you can do, like customizing your smoothie or customizing your, right? When we think about zero-party data, we have to think about it from the outside in. We can't think about it purely in the context of what is the data that I want to have about my customers. Rather, we have to think about it in the context of what value can I deliver to my customers? And our listener is absolutely right. It is hard for some verticals and industries. Am I really going to do a quiz about my preferred paper towel brand? Probably not. However, I will give you a really, really good example of a transactional brand that has a great experience here, and it's Arm & Hammer cat litter. So I know. Arm has a very cool little personality quiz, P-U-R-R, personality quiz, and it's really cute. If there's one thing that trumps being a privacy nerd, it's being a cat mom, right? And so they have these like great questions about like, is your cat part of the family? How, is your cat indoor, outdoor? Just very cute questions. But embedded in that personality quiz, they also ask a question about, it's sort of like a 5-point scale. Like, I like my home to be welcoming, warm and welcoming to guests, even when I'm not expecting them, or something like that. It's a very and of course, it's in the middle of this quiz, and you're not really thinking about it. But if you think about it in hindsight, what else does Arm & Hammer make and sell? Home fragrances, candles, that kind of thing. So in the course of this one very emotional and emotionally rewarding experience, they're just learning a tiny bit more about me. And I'm willing to share the information because it just feels good. So even within those items and those products and verticals where you think, oh, I'm never going to be able to get information about home fragrances or cat litter, Arm & Hammer's found a great way to do it.
I love it. And I am channeling your cat mom. I'm a dog mom, but I feel allied here. I would like to go to your example of Sephora because since you are a skeptical perfectionist, I can imagine that they had to have a basis of trust before you would tell them about, skincare concerns. And I'm curious about a company that you might want to imagine even in the same category that doesn't have your trust, and how you, skeptical perfectionist, could be nudged there to give up. Give up might be the wrong word, to share zero data.
It's a great question, and the biggest thing for skeptical protectionists is transparency. Transparency around why you're collecting the data and what you're going to do with the data. Those are the most valuable things you can do. Giving people an opt-out and making it, taking a data minimization approach so that the experience isn't my way or the highway. The experience is, if you're willing to share some information, we'll prove to you that we're using it well. And the example and the sort of thing I like to point out here is when you go to either download an app or you go to fill out a form and like every field is required. How about letting me just fill out a few of the fields, the really critical ones, and then the next time you can ask me to provide the next piece of data. So thinking about data collection in a more progressive way and minimizing the required amount of data. I've been a member of the Sephora program for a really long time, and I suspect that when I first provided the information, I probably didn't provide my skincare concerns, but I did tell them, brown hair, brown eyes, olive complexion. I suspect that over time, I have added more and more data to my profile. And that really is an enormous, enormous part of how you build trust with skeptical protectionists.
Right. So through progressive value, too.
Progressive value and transparency, yeah.
So now and I think you mentioned this in terms of some of our younger consumers who believe, okay, it's probably too late. I've probably blown it in terms of data. If in that context, there's a brand that wants to start showing that some brands are different, some brands can stand out. What are some of the statements or assertions that you might expect that brand to make?
Yeah, I hate to sound like a broken record here, but it is also about transparency, I think. I go back to transparency so often because we don't tend to do the transparency part of privacy very well. there is something to be said for, even within those younger consumers, even, you know, those consumers who don't really understand that connecting, like logging into a real estate website with your social media account might not be the best idea. If you want to be a brand that is distinguishing and differentiating on here's why we don't provide that opportunity, then you need to actually make it a part of your brand values. You need to actually make it part of how you communicate with consumers. I see so often brands that are doing really good work in zero-party data, whether that is a highly customizable profile and preferences page or a really great sort of widget or tool, and they sort of create it and hope people will come. And what I say is, when you're doing this really hard work, you actually have to treat it as a product almost. Treat it as a marketing campaign. Be out there and talk about it. It's scary. It can be very, very scary in the privacy world because I do think sometimes it feels like no good deed goes unpunished. But using that, and especially now when we know that consumers are so much more privacy conscious, when we know that their behaviors when we break trust or when they perceive a privacy misuse really damages us, we have to be out there talking about it more.
I'm totally with you. And then as a marketing person, and I imagine others on our listening audience would imagine the same. Okay, great. I'd love to do that. I'd love to capture granular preferences. I'd love to make sure they're actually used accordingly in my company. That might have something to do with IT. What do I do next?
Yes, yes. Okay, so some people are going to get mad at me here. Here's the thing. I don't think we can continue to do end runs around the IT team. Marketers need, and we've been talking about this for a decade, right? The CMO and the CIO need to come together and they need to collaborate and they need to be partners. I see this more than I ever have before. I see a recognition on the part of the CIO and their team that indeed marketing is incredibly complicated. Marketers are using incredibly and increasingly complex tools. And maybe I don't need to be the owner of those tools. Maybe I don't need to build my own. But what I can do is be a seat at the table. And this is true both of the CIO and Camille, the CISO, right? So we've got to have the CISO at the table asking questions about what marketing is doing, understanding and learning why we're trying to collect certain kinds of data, why we want our consent mechanism, whether that's a pop-up or a widget or a banner, to be designed to fit brand guidelines. We want it to be a branded experience. We need to be able to have those conversations. So it may not mean that they control those things, but it means that they are stakeholders. And I see this, as I say, happening more than I ever have before.
I was going to imagine and ask that as a question, especially with Google's news about deprecating the cookies to the extent, or in the mode they've been, although I feel like their shift is kind of similar. But what questions are you hearing? What level of concern are you hearing from marketers? Have those conversations extended into other parts of the team?
Gosh, tremendous concern. So the marketing organization is rightly concerned about a few things. First of all, it's being able to reach consumers, right, in digital advertising. So for those on the webinar who may not be familiar, Mozilla, Firefox, Apple, they have already deprecated third-party cross-site tracking cookies and the ability for marketers to track people across platforms and across websites. Google is deprecating those by 2022. Now, again, this goes back to the question of first-party data. If you are on my site and I'm using first-party cookies, I can continue to learn about you and know about you, and I can continue to collect first and zero-party data and use that first and zero-party data in other areas. What I can't do is go taking my first-party cookie and somebody else's first-party cookie and doing a cookie sync and finding you on 15 different websites somewhere else and tracking your behavior there. Marketers have very real and some legitimate concerns, I would say, around things like measuring their marketing spend. Cross-site cookies are how we know how many impressions, ad impressions it took for you to finally click or visit my website. They're how we know the performance of a marketing campaign. Unfortunately, because we started out wanting to use third-party cookies for that and moved into what many people call surveillance marketing, the baby's getting thrown out with the bathwater. So marketers are really concerned that they're not going to be able to reach their consumers and their prospective customers on different websites, in publications and so on. They're worried they're not going to be able to measure their marketing spend. And while those are legitimate, consumers have indicated that they're willing to install ad blockers and tracker blockers and all this stuff and use privacy-preserving browsers and modes to get rid of this. So a lot of the conversations that we're having now are, okay, so how, as whether you're a marketer or somebody in the privacy organization, how can you continue to serve your customers? And we keep going back to first-party data. We keep going back to zero-party data and acknowledging that the old or the recent, we're going to track everybody all over the internet and pervasively, create identities and profiles about them. It's just not going to happen anymore. Like, it's really, that can't continue to exist. Now, I want to go back super quickly to the privacy page that I showed earlier and all of those trackers, because here's the thing. That's what we're talking about. It's those 55 trackers and ad server requests that are getting broken. And we've sort of done this to ourselves. You and I had a conversation when we were sort of talking about the content for today. And I mentioned to you that I will often look at a tracker map for a website before I talk to a client, and I'll say to them, oh, I noticed that you're using like this ad tech vendor, and they'll say, actually, we don't work with them anymore. We haven't worked with them in a year. You're still firing their code, and you're still giving them user data. That's a problem.
That's a problem. And again, marketing sometimes doesn't even know either where to start or where to go next.
Right. That's exactly right.
What we were just talking about the current world is shifting. It's going, what I think is interesting about that for marketers is often our way of tracking our success has been tacked to the current or the just past world, meaning, as you said, number of impressions, number of data points, essentially, starting with email address. Of course, it's all meant to roll up to revenue contributed, but prior to that metric, what are metrics that you think are more germane these days, given what we both believe is the more important emphasis?
So I'm going to bring that up just a level before I answer it to say that I think what we have done for the last 10 years as marketers is treat all digital as acquisition. So we haven't been focusing on things like customer lifetime value. We've been looking at these short-term metrics like conversion, like and clicks, and I think we're missing a really, really important metric around our customer health and lifetime value. We're missing things like awareness, brand awareness, by treating digital like an acquisition machine. And what I see increasingly is marketers realizing that they should be treating marketing or advertising in as much as any other channel as a retention mechanism. And so again, we go back to the first-party data. You have first-party data about your customers. Why aren't you embedding that in your digital programs? Why aren't you thinking about what their last experience of you was? When you're doing frequency capping as a marketer, that is restricting or limiting the number of times that someone sees an ad, we're doing that on the basis of a device or a browser today. So don't show this device or this browser my ad more than 3 times in a week. But what about all of the other impressions, like the email that you're sending your customers? Like now they're seeing 3 ads plus 3 emails plus a direct mail campaign. Why aren't we thinking about frequency capping in a much more holistic and omni-channel sense? So I think those things like contact strategies and customer lifetime value and health of the database and growth of the database and trust, willingness to share information is a barometer of trust. These are the metrics that I feel like we really have to go back to, and then awareness, right? When we are using data to hyper-personalize, where we're getting so granular that we're not actually creating brand awareness with potential future customers, that's a real miss, and that's what digital has gotten us. Mark Pritchard from Procter & Gamble a few years ago said that they were pulling way back on really narrow targeting in Facebook because they were leaving brand awareness on the table. If you're only marketing to the people who are in market for your item right now, where the highest and the biggest metric is immediate conversion, then how are you going to make sure other people know about you when it is time for them to need your product or evaluate your product category?
That is so fundamental and true. Also wonderful is your use of segments here, and I want to spend just a little time on that. 2 questions answering either way. One, you mentioned Cambridge Analytica as a driver. First question is, what do you think might be other drivers in a sort of macro environment that are coming up? And then also interested in life stage drivers that you think are also significant.
Yeah, so I'll answer the second one first. Life stage drivers really are, as I mentioned, with those reckless rebels that shift out of that segment, there's a lot of, I don't know what I don't know. And when I go out to get my first car loan or get a mortgage or, fill out these forms in quadruplicate that have so much of my personal information about me, and I've never checked my credit score, and suddenly, that matters, and that's like a black box. I don't know what's causing my credit score. Those things really affect how people think about their privacy and their personal information. But I want to be very clear, too, that there's a nuance in what people think privacy is. And so while it is true that younger individuals may not be as privacy conscious about the data that is collected by the black box, they are very conscious of the algorithms at work. So I will frequently, when we're back in the before times and we could all raise our hands, I would ask a room, how many of you know what a Finsta is? And how many of you have a Finsta? And 3 hands in the room would go up. Well, a Finsta is a fake Instagram. And young people have multiple Instagram accounts because they are curating who can see what content they share. right? They've created their own group where they're willing to share really big, very widely with parents and family, and much more narrowly with limited folks. The other thing that's really interesting is that they will share an Instagram account to mess up the algorithm. It's fascinating. So that's a really big, I would say, when we think about life stages, we should be thinking about what that cohort of young people who have such a sophisticated understanding of algorithms and data will be doing to us as marketers in 10 years, right? We can't predict that. So that's one thing. In terms of, you asked your first question, which I'm now completely...
The macro. So are there other sort of Cambridge Analytica type events down the road? And put another way, actually, if everything that we've known about hacked election, threats, et cetera, hasn't been enough, then what will be enough to migrate people? In other words, what is migrating people to greater awareness about privacy?
Yeah, it's a great question, because as you say, whether it's elections or, umpteen data breach notifications that you get every year, and those aren't moving the needle, but Cambridge Analytica really exposed the underbelly of what we didn't know. And what's significant about that event is that it wasn't a data breach. It was contractually shared data. You opted in. You agreed to letting us share this data, and we did contractually. We told them to delete it. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be more instances like that. I think it's going to be more instances where we are revealing the amount of information that is collected about people and how it is used. I also think that when we have our marketing hats on today, as you alluded to, we look at the recent past, right? But I don't think that we can possibly look at Generation Z and think that they're going to act or behave in nearly the same way as Gen Y or even millennials. They are so different. And, as an example, my 16-year-old nephew, uses a VPN on his devices, and all of the young people in my life use Signal as their primary messaging platform. They understand that the ability to disappear messages and time limit messages is much more representative of how we act as human beings in the real world, and that's what they're doing now.
So interesting. And this body of people, one might argue, has understood the dark side and has taken action. And so back to the bright side, I see that marketers will have the challenge, opportunity, and direction to provide good reasons, valuable reasons to offer this data exchange and share those thoughts to any extent, and then we're already at time.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that marketers have a tremendous opportunity, and I think that savvy marketers are thinking about ways to deepen customer relationships without being creepy, without violating trust, and really making those cornerstones of their marketing programs and marketing strategies in the future.
Marvelous. Fatemeh, I'm sure I'm speaking for everybody who's joined us to say thank you for both detailed, well-researched, thoughtful, and very applicable information today, as well as directionally very inspiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for having me. It was really fun.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks for joining our webinar today, and you can find more information at wirewheel.io.